Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for being here and welcome to our 69th, I believe, MedMentor Monday panel. Tonight's panel will be on MCAT study tips, and it's very exciting to see so many attendees here. Before we start, I just wanted to quickly plug the Q&A chat function for anyone who's attending live. Please feel free to use that at any point. You can ask questions anonymously if you'd like, and either one of us, like the panelists, will answer it, or we can decide to answer it live if it seems like it's a very broad question. Just wanted to let you know. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and get started. So we'll start with everyone's introductions. If you can all just go around and say your name, what year you're in and the program you're in, and what year you took the MCAT, maybe, if you remember.
I can start. Hi, everyone. My name is Vishnu, MS4. I'm currently on leave of absence. I'll be graduating 2025, and I took the MCAT in 2018.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm an MS3 and I took the MCAT in 2020.
Hey, I'm Farnaz. I'm a fourth year this summer. I'm sorry, Joyce. And I took the MCAT in 2019.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joyce. I'm an MS1. I took the MCAT in 2022.
Hey everyone, I'm Tiffany. I'm also a MS1. I took the MCAT, I think, 2021.
Great, thank you all so much for being here. So maybe we can go ahead and get started with some questions. I'll put the question in the chat too, so you guys can reference it. So for our first question, how did you study for the MCAT, just like in general? How did you study for it, and what resources did you rely on the most? And maybe how long did you study for? It's just like general questions.
I can start. So in terms of how long I studied, so I had graduated from college May of 2018, and then I took around 3 months or so. So started studying June through September. I think the first 2 months were more like was studying sort of part-time, doing a lot of content review, primarily with Khan Academy, looking through like Princeton review a little bit. And then the last like 4 to 6 weeks, I ramped things up and I was doing practice tests, both like through the AAMC and then as well as their, question banks as well. And so that ramped up a lot in the last month.
I can talk about my study as well. I took it, finished graduate school in November, and then started studying, I would say around like January-ish of 2019. I kind of also started off slow, like Vishnu, mostly, volunteering, research, it was during my gap year, all those things, really full time. But um, I really just did like the Kaplan books. I read over them and then made a summary doc, like very old school studying, and then out the things I didn't know. And maybe for the last, and I did Khan Academy for the psych and the cars section. I didn't read the Kaplan one for that. And then for the last maybe 2 weeks or so, I took like the three, I remember at the time there were three tests, practice tests. So I took those mostly to just see kind of what the score range is that I'm getting. And then that's kind of mostly it. And then when I wrote it after.
Yeah, in terms of how I studied for the MCAT, I took the MCAT in January of 2020. So this was during the winter quarter of my third year. And I think it's important to keep in context, like the way that you plan studying for the MCAT, it surrounds like how you want to enter medical school, whether it's you're going to take a gap year, whether you're going to not take a gap year. I think that's important in considering when you're going to plan taking the MCAT. But I spent about a month and a half studying for the MCAT because this was like during kind of my winter break-ish time, and then during the beginning of winter quarter when things were starting to ramp up. So I mainly depended on UWorld for both my content review and for my like practice questions, as I do in medical school too. But yeah, so UWorld has been primarily my study tool for MCAT, and then in terms of the last month before the MCAT, as everyone has said so far, the AMC materials, and there were 4 practice tests when I took it, so I took all 4.
Okay, I can go next. So I have to preface, I'm a non-traditional student. So I graduated undergrad in 2016. And so when I took the MCAT, or by the time I thought about taking the MCAT, I had taken like those prereqs literally like a decade earlier. So I had to do a lot of self-studying just to even catch up and like review everything. And I was not a good student in undergrad, like was really bad at chemistry, especially. So I had to spend a lot more time. I was also working full time when I decided I was going to, kind of pivot careers. Um, so for me, because I was so weak in the sciences and because it had been so long, I spent a lot of time just really literally like teaching myself the sciences all over again. I actually used Anki quite a bit to help me with like the biology and like the biochem. On my commutes to work, I would listen to, I think like Kaplan has like this audio book of their biochemistry book. And so I would listen to that on my commute. I would listen to random like YouTube videos on whatever made sense for me to listen to at the time. I probably spent about 7 months studying part-time because again, I was working full-time. And for like, studying like OChem and chemistry and whatnot, I actually learned via YouTube videos through something called Chad's Prep. So all my really bad at chemistry people, he's like amazing, and also bad at physics. He's really good at teaching you from the foundation. I literally did like the entire OChem as a second semester book, again, just to kind of solidify myself on everything I had forgotten. And then towards maybe like the last like 2 months of prep, I really focused on the AMC materials like everyone else has been saying. In between like my content review and the AMC materials, I also used UWorld. I got through UWorld twice. I didn't use it for cars, but I did use it for everything else. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I did also take probably close to like 15 practice tests during this time, just to, because I didn't have like really like a dedicated study period. And I knew that I learned best through taking practice tests. And so I just kind of fit those in wherever made sense in my schedule. So probably a little bit unconventional compared to everyone, but you have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely echo Joyce's point about finding what works for you. I think for me, I took my test in September and then started in March. I was in college then, so still taking a lot of the relevant classes, which helped a lot with like content review. But while I was still in school, I just did like Anki for psych/soc and get that kind of out of the way. I would do like some course passages and then kind of do content review-ish. But I think I really started studying June to September. And that was like your basics, like content review, UWorld, practice questions, practice tests, more Anki, and then taking the thing in September.
Great. It's great to hear that we're going to have so many different like perspectives. People who took it very many different ways. Okay, so maybe a more specific question about cars. I think a lot of people struggle with cars. How did you prepare for cars section specifically? Did you do anything different, or did you just treat it like all the other sections? And do you have any advice or tips for getting better at cars since it's not very memorization based?
I guess I can try. So I didn't really prepare specifically for cars. I was one of those I actually did better on cars when I started out versus everything else. But again, I think that's just because I was out of school for such a long time. I think the one general thing that helped me the most is I kept up with reading throughout, leaving undergrad and whatnot. And it wasn't like I wasn't reading scientific articles or anything like that. I just enjoyed reading on like just reading what I enjoyed reading, like my fiction novels and whatnot. And I think that kind of helped a lot with just kind of um, like being able to pay attention to the passage, because I know sometimes it's really hard to like have your attention and figure out what the passage is even trying to say. That's just an overall general, like I think something that I enjoyed doing was helpful. In terms of the actual, like when I try to sit down and practice for it, I only use the AMC material just because I had heard that all of the other sources were just not as representative, whether that was talking about in length, in maybe the style of questions. And I actually found the AMC like section bank or whatever the question packs for the car section to be quite difficult. But I think part of it is just trying to understand their reasoning for those questions. And I didn't think that I did try looking at, like I think there's like the Jack Weston passages, there's like U World, but I didn't think that the explanations and kind of like their reasoning made as much sense to me as the AMC style, because ultimately those people are the ones who are writing the MCAT and are going to be creating those questions for you. So I try to only focus on the AMC material for the car section.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Joyce said because I agree 100%. I felt that there was no other resource that really did cars justice besides the AMC, because they're the ones that actually create the test and create the materials. So the third-party resources can also be helpful in the sense that it can help you with just getting through passages and just like getting the timing of things, but it might not be helpful for how you actually think through a passage. And that's all I have to add.
Great. We got a question in the Q&A that's kind of related to the next question that I was gonna ask. So the anonymous question is, how did you know you were ready, when you were ready to take the MCAT? And the question that I was gonna ask is, how did you decide on the timing for taking the MCAT? Did you take it, some of you have already mentioned if you took it as an undergrad or after graduating, and if you can speak to some pros or cons that you experienced, taking it like as an undergrad or after undergrad or whatever.
I can take this one. I think in terms of timing, if you're a few years out from undergrad, I think that your preparation may need to be just a little bit longer just because there's more time necessary for content review. I think it's fair to say that for a lot of us, like we're working full time between undergrad and med school, that like you may have to take a longer time because now you're, not able to study full time. You're having to study like in the evenings after work. So just the schedule is different. I think personally for me, I chose to take it like right after undergrad. I was doing just like a part-time teaching job during that summer, which allowed for some flexibility to do a lot of the content review for a couple of months. And then afterwards, I took the last month just fully dedicated to the MCAT before starting to work full time. And so I think that allowed me to do practice exams and review them in further detail. I think in terms of whether to take it like after undergrad or during undergrad, I think it just depends on what your comfort level is with like the lower division courses that you're taking as well as biochemistry. I think for me personally, like bio was actually my weak point. I was not a bio major in college, and so I struggled a lot with the level of memorization for that section of the MCAT. And so I felt like if I were to take it during undergrad, it would have been a little bit more difficult for me. And so I felt like taking it after undergrad when I just had a little bit more flexibility was beneficial for that. And so I think when thinking about that, I would just think about how you're feeling about those lower divs and whether there are just, some courses that maybe you need to review further, and that might make it better to take it after undergrad, personally for me.
I think that I can't really speak to the timing in undergrad because I decided to be pre-med. Like I wasn't pre-med in undergrad, really realized I want to do medicine like halfway through grad school. But I think that um I think in general, some people do well with slowly studying for months, like Vishnu was saying, as you're, working or doing other things and then taking a dedicated. But I think for me, just given my MCAT and also my boards now, I feel like the pattern is I do better when I have a dedicated time. I don't do great at like just chipping at it away a little bit while I'm doing other things. So I think figuring that out is helpful, but I think it worked out for me. It just happened to be I had more time, right? I wasn't in college, I was in classes, just they're more flexible. You can do them, you can kind of manage your time better. So I feel like that was the timing of that. I would just kind of try to see which maybe by trying it out really see which type of studying like dedicated works better for you. But I would recommend that just because it worked out for me, but it's very individual, depending on what you how you study. But I think in terms of when I actually knew I can read it, I mostly don't study with tests. I kind of take them to see how I'm scoring. So that's kind of what I did. Like when I finished reviewing my like the books, I made myself like the review that I was telling you of like things I didn't know. Then I reviewed that, and then afterwards in my like last 2 weeks, I wrote the 3 tests and the scores. I knew kind of around where I have to get, right? And the scores were around that benchmark. So then I wrote it, and actually I think at least at the time back in the day when I wrote it in 2019, they were very accurate. Like I think my the average of the 3 scores I got on the tests was 1 point lower than what I actually got on my exam. So very accurate, at least anecdotally for me and like my friends that were going through it at the same time. I don't know if I hope it's still the same and kind of still seems true for at least our board exams as well. So I hope that would be a good way to kind of see, okay, this is kind of where I'm scoring, this is what I want to get. I think I'm ready to write it.
I would also just add, for people that are contemplating taking it during undergrad or shortly after undergrad, I think it's really helpful to try to take whatever the version of biochem is at your school, like take that like right before the MCAT if possible, because there's just a large volume of biochemistry memorization, the Krebs cycle, and all of those pathways that I think, why not just memorize it for the course itself that you're taking, and then that information is more fresh while you're studying for the MCAT. I think similar thing with psychology, sociology too. There's just a lot of just straight memorization in terms of a lot of those concepts. I would like try to take that like closer to the MCAT if possible. I think that'll just make the content review a little bit smoother.
Yeah, I didn't say this, but actually, I was also 3 years out of undergrad. Definitely forgot all about that stuff, forgot all about biochem. So definitely that is a downside. Your dedicated has to be longer just because like who remembers chem from like OChem? Like come on, like no.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that. I'll put in my own experience really quick because I did take it as an undergrad, and I also planned it, like I planned to take it right after I took biochem, and that was so helpful. Like I ended up doing great. I was on the biochem, whatever, biology biochem section. And I think that's a good strategy, is to try to take as many of those undergrad classes that are directly related to the MCAT as possible. The only thing I wasn't able to take before the MCAT was a psychology or a sociology, and that ended up being my worst section on the MCAT. So at least for me, I think it really helps to take undergrad classes, even if they're not directly preparing you for the MCAT. I mean, it's like the same content. You're indirectly preparing for the MCAT. So totally agree. And I also agree with Fairnaz on like the AMC exams that she's talking about. My actual score was the literal average of those 3 exams. So they're very predictive. And that actually segues into the next question that I was going to ask. You've all talked, I think most of you have talked about doing practice exams. So can you just speak a little more to the importance of doing practice tests and how you incorporated them into your study plan? And do you recommend doing third-party practice exams or AAMC practice exams first? Like which one should you start with? If anyone has any opinions on that.
Yeah, I can speak to this because I literally took 15 practice exams. And my reasoning for doing so many was really, I treated each of these as if I was taking the actual MCAT, like it was really more for stamina. I like spent the entire 7 hours sitting down, really treated it as if it was test day. And that was just for me to start building up my stamina really early on. Probably in the beginning of my prep stages, I would take maybe one or two per month, just to see like, is my score getting even like a little bit better? And I only use third-party sources first. There's only, I think when I took the MCAT, there were 5 AMC tests. I think there's like one more now, but because there were only 5, I saved those 5 for my last month of the MCAT, like right before I was going to take the test. I took the test in January of 2022, so last year, or oh my gosh, it was 2 years ago, sorry, in January 2022. And everything else, they were all free. So basically I went to like Barnes and Noble and I would go to like their their study prep section, and the way you get like free exams, or the way they ask you to get access to free exams is based on kind of like words and stuff in the book. And so I would use that to help me. Otherwise, sometimes like they would have sales on Black Friday for like UWorld or Blueprint or all of those other testing companies. And I would buy a bundle of like maybe 4 and then do those. I didn't take like the scores on those as seriously as I took my last month of AMC practice material scores, just because, again, these are third-party resources. They might not be as accurate. And I did see a lot of fluctuation in my scores in those third-party resources. However, I think, again, it was really good just to see like, okay, I have glaring gaps in these sections. And if that test happened to, really focus on said gaps, then I knew that I had to, study that section specifically. Or if I spent a lot of time studying physics and chem, and for some reason my score was not going up in physics and chem, that probably meant that I was not really approaching that section correctly, or approaching whatever I had been studying about in that section correctly. So I didn't really use practice tests as much to gauge like my score per se, but just to gauge my understanding of the content. It's only the last 5 tests specifically from the AMC that I used to gauge like, okay, this is like around where I'll be scoring, and kind of echoing what everyone said in the last question. My test score was like within, I think, 2 points of my average as well.
Yeah, I think a good way to get started is to maybe start with third-party practice tests. I know Blueprint. I think the first one I ever did was like a half-length one with Blueprint or Next Step. So that's a good way to get a feel for like the test questions without having to spend the whole how many hours? 6 or 7 hours. And then you can experiment with other third-party resources. For me, I saved like the real AMC test towards the very end, and like many others have said, it was average. It was a little average of the scores I got from those. But I think how I did it was I would take one practice test on like a Saturday and then spend Sunday reviewing. And that's just a good way to like have a day off on Sunday and just look over like the questions you got wrong and then categorize it on like a spreadsheet. I think I had a spreadsheet of like the different sections and then questions I got wrong or like concepts I need to review. That's a good way to, I guess, like keep track and log areas of weakness that you can target and improve on. I would say I wish I did maybe as many as Joyce, but I wish I did more practice tests because and also simulating the conditions I think is very important, and not, being like, oh, I have to use the restroom and then just getting up and walking over to the bathroom. But no, like being okay, this is a real test and I can't get up halfway. I need to treat this like seriously, and trying to minimize like distractions around you. I think simulating like the actual test conditions will help as well. But just getting used to sitting there for a very long time and taking a test, I think is a big part, like stamina is a big part of the test too. So taking all these practice exams will help with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I did that for the MCAT and it was great. I did not do that for step one and I suffered so much. I almost didn't finish every single section. So I highly recommend simulating the actual exam. Okay, great. And then again, we have an anonymous question that kind of is similar to the question I was going to ask next. So the anonymous question was, did you ever hit a plateau when studying for the MCAT and how did you get past that point? And what I was going to ask is, how did you stay on track with your schedule and set specific goals for yourself? Maybe they're not that related, but either one is fine.
I think in general, there's this instinct when you first start studying to, try to be as comprehensive as possible with your content review relative to the amount of time that you spend taking practice tests. And I think sometimes you get into this trap where you are, reviewing more and more and more content, and there really is no way that you are going to comprehensively remember every detail and every bit of content from all of these different subjects and disciplines. And I think at some point, you may be spending more and more weeks doing content review, and you realize that you've sort of hit a plateau with how much specific content you necessarily are going to learn fresh for the MCAT. And I think at that point, it's more efficient to shift over to doing more practice exams because there's so much content review that you will brush up on by reviewing those practice exams. And I think taking those practice tests is important to help you sharpen those test taking skills for the MCAT as well. So I think, when you're first starting content review, I would try to make it as targeted as possible. So if you're, fresh out of undergrad or in undergrad and you have some content review already from your coursework, I would try to be as targeted as possible and then prioritize taking, more practice tests because that itself is content review. And I think it's more efficient and I think it's just better quality preparation for the test.
Yeah, just to add on what Vishnu said, I 100% agreed with everything he said. It's really, really important to not get hung up on every detail when it comes to content review because practice questions are a great way to reinforce content. And especially if you use a question bank like UWorld, you'll get specific questions about specific concepts over and over and over again. And so even within doing practice tests, practice questions, you'll see concepts appear over and over again. And if you get something wrong over and over again, you will eventually learn from it. I do want to say, two more things is one is I would, be careful about resource overload because we've said a lot about all these really cool different resources and your first instinct might be like, let's just use all of them because I think if I use all of them, then my score will be the highest because I'm using every single resource. But I would say that it's really important to just narrow yourself down to just a few and really use those resources to the highest care quality possible. And that's what's really going to be helpful for you. And the question about setting specific goals for yourself is kind of related to resources. I'd be careful about like setting really lofty goals because those become really discouraging. So for example, if you're like, I'm going to do 100 like UWorld questions a day, it may seem like productive, but in fact, it might be really discouraging when you only reach even like you did 70 questions, which is a lot, but you didn't meet your 100 question goal. So I think each day I usually set like mini goals for myself, like 10 questions or something, so that if you exceed your like low set goals, then you'll feel really accomplished. So, you set, small goals and they work towards the big goal. So I would say, yeah, less resources, actually, like the simpler your study plan, the less resources, the better, in my opinion. So that's kind of my tips for study schedule.
I'm like kind of echoing what everyone else is saying. I think it's really important to actually incorporate rest days into your study schedule. It's not realistic that you are going to study every single day. Life is going to happen. There are going to be days when you can't study. And if you have, okay, well, I have like a day built in, or I have 2 days built in where you can either use to catch up, or you just need a break. And just being realistic about that. Like, again, I studied for 7 months. Life happened during those 7 months. It was during the holidays as well. So I didn't make any plans to schedule during the holidays because I just knew like I wasn't going to, and just being realistic about that, I think helps a lot with the burnout aspect, and knowing that you have some flexibility built in your schedule also gives you just like kind of peace of mind when you maybe aren't able to finish whatever goals that you have set for yourself that day. I also did I did like weekly and monthly goals too, just because I had so much more like time spread out, as opposed to daily goals, just because my schedule after work looked different day to day. Like there were days I was more tired than others, and whatnot. So really important to incorporate rest days.
I just want to say one small thing about like overall kind of going about making a schedule for any sort of standardized test, Jesus, that you have coming up. I think that I know it's two different approaches that you can take, and I just for anybody in the audience that's like me, just want to say I know there's a lot of people that kind of go by, having very organized plans of like what they're going to do in a day from this hour to this hour, so on and so forth, and that's amazing. But if you're like me, it's also totally fine if you're just like, this week I'm going to finish the Bio Kaplan book, and that's all you're going to do, and that's totally fine, right? Like one day you might not study as much, like everybody else was saying, like life's happening, things are going on, and then the other day you catch up. As long as you kind of are hitting your goals, that's okay. So like if that works better for you, like don't be overwhelmed by the schedule, because I know I definitely have better times, and like if something works for you, just stick to it. Try to, like the same thing really with the resources as well. Like I think it's great to every now and then try new resources and like optimize your studying, but if something works for you, it's totally fine to just stick to it. And I was going to say one more thing too, and I completely forgot. So I'm just going to end with that.
No worries, you can always mention it if it comes back to you. Okay. Can you offer any advice for students who are considering postponing or retaking the MCAT?
I can talk about postponing it. So I probably like pushed my test back like 3 times, just because I knew that I wasn't ready to take it. I hadn't finished. I know everyone says like you can get really bogged down with content review, but I was at a point where I didn't know like true. I really didn't know anything for like OChem or like the last half of OChem or like the first half of physics, or like there were certain areas that I knew that I was really weak on. And as someone who had like a lower GPA coming out of undergrad, I really wanted to be at my best, be in my best condition, I guess, or really give my all to taking the MCAT. And even though that meant that, I had to pay a fee to postpone it, I think for me, it was worth it just because I ended up being very happy with my score in the end. And I didn't feel like I rushed into it. Like, I think if I had taken it, I probably would have felt a lot more anxious, and I have a lot of test anxiety to begin with already. So I think that would have like feeling like I was unprepared and not in like a great state of mind, and just being like, I'm just gonna kind of bank on luck. Maybe it'll be a good day for me that day. Instead of going with that approach, kind of knowing like, okay, I've done all that I can. Like I did all my practice tests, and I've done all that I can, and feeling better about myself, I guess, because I think your self-confidence actually plays a huge role in how you just how you approach the test and how you feel on test day. You will probably walk out not feeling great, because I walked out not feeling great and walked in feeling like I was going to do really well. But if I had walked in feeling like I'm gonna do horribly, I think that mindset really just puts you down for the entire test. It's 7 hours, it's long. And so for me, just knowing that I think you have to be really honest with yourself and just know like, have you done all that you can? Have you hit, at the very minimum, have you done all of the practice questions that come from the AMC practice? What they have, like their own practice materials, have you done all of those? Or have you done all of the practice tests that come from the AMC? I think if you haven't done those at a minimum, then it's probably worth thinking pushing it back because you don't really know what you're going to score. And I don't think you really know as much of what you're walking into unless you've done those at a minimum. And when I decided to postpone my MCAT, I just knew, I think I had maybe like a month or so before, and I just knew that there was no way I was going to get through everything in addition to everything I hadn't covered. So that was really what made me decide to postpone it. And I did that like 3 times. So obviously, like I didn't learn my lesson the first time, and it's okay to give yourself grace. Just again, like the timeline needs to work for you.
Yeah, totally agree. I also must have postponed it like, I don't know, once or twice. There's no shame in it. It's good to be as prepared as you possibly can be. And then maybe for those who are maybe considering retaking, I think some advice that I heard is to, treat that first experience as that like a learning experience. Like it might help to reflect on what happened that first time. How did you feel prepared for each section? And I think having gone through the actual exam once, there's no better way to identify like what your strengths and weaknesses are as you went through the actual thing. So again, give yourself some grace. You won't be the first person to ever retake it and get into med school. It happens and it's totally fine. Just try to, focus on like, how can I learn from that experience? Okay, and we're a little behind schedule, but maybe we can quickly shift into, it's totally fine. We can shift into test day tips. And again, another question that is pretty relevant. The question was, what did you do the day before the MCAT? Did you review or just rest? And the question I was going to ask is, when did you stop studying? Did you study up until the day before, or did you take some time off before the exam?
This is a really good question, in terms of, also managing like your mental health, your physical health, and currently with like your study schedule. I think in general, it's just really important to have like other hobbies and things just to like keep you sane while you're studying for the MCAT. Like I know I had said previously, studying full time for a period of time may be beneficial, but when I was doing that, I was also like continuing to volunteer, like see friends and do things just to like get my mind off studying when I could. In terms of when I stopped studying, I think it was the day before, and then I tried my very best to get like a good night's sleep the last couple of days before the exam. Although I did have a lot of trouble sleeping like the couple of days before, and then when I went to the testing center, everybody had like not slept the night before as well. So I think just like, really get used to like, especially if you're a more nocturnal person, like get used to like the week before studying like on a consistent sleep schedule and like something that like mirrors how like the test day is going to be, just so that you wake up refreshed and you're able to like hit the ground running. Um, Looking back, I probably would have just spent the last day just like not worrying about the studying itself and just like maybe doing something fun to get my mind off things. But the way it ended up happening, I was just continuing to study the day before. But I think really important is just like reset your sleep schedule to be, more in line with like an 8 a.m. start day for the MCAT itself.
Yeah, I would say I stopped studying, 2 days before the exam, because the day before the exam, um, I just, chilled. I think that, the day before the exam, if you were going to do anything, in terms of like preparation, some like you can memorize a biochemical pathway one more time and something like just very low, chill, like glycolysis, all that stuff. You can just rewrite it again or something like that. Some students also like to have like a little cheat sheet that they kind of regurgitate on like during the tutorial portion of like the beginning of the MCAT. If you're already familiar with their interface, you can use that extra time to like write down key formulas or write down a biochemical pathway again. So you can do that before the day before the exam, but I usually would recommend not studying the day before the exam because there's like nothing you can study the day before the exam that's going to get you like a lot of points on the exam. So just be confident, I think, is the main thing in yourself, and be confident that you did what it took to like study and make it through. So yeah, I mean, echoing what someone said earlier, confidence, self-confidence is really a big part. So, whatever you have to do to hype yourself up.
Yeah, sorry, last thing. I did what Anthony was talking about with the regurgitating the formula sheet. So I probably wrote that maybe like 2 or 3 times because you have like 10 minutes to write down whatever. And then I maybe wrote down some like amino acids here and there. What really helped me, and if you are taking the test at a center that's close to you, just because I like to feel as prepared as possible. I actually drove out to the testing center the day before, just to see like what does the layout look like where is the bathroom, what floor is it on, like how do I get into the building. And I think that alleviated a lot of like, I don't know, pre-exam jitters. Those are like the kinds of things that I don't think you really think about until you get to the site. So I would suggest maybe doing that, but I didn't do any hard studying at all either. Just again, making sure that I had my formulas down. Again, maybe like reviewing my amino acids. But I think the single most thing that helped me was feel more prepared was I think going to the testing site and just seeing what it looked like and where I would have to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the testing site. And I don't know if this next question will apply because I don't know if anyone had to travel to take the test. Maybe if for those who had to travel for testing, how far in advance did you travel? And do you have any tips for testing at sites that are not local? Is that anyone's experience? Okay, great. Okay, sorry for those who are looking for some advice. Okay. Yeah, and then I guess this anonymous question is good, and some people already started talking about this, but do you have any advice in regards to experiencing test anxiety before and during the exam? I took it once and could not sleep as I was super anxious right before and during the exam. If anyone has like any other things they want to add about anxiety and stress management, maybe we can do that now.
I can talk about sleep. I know Vishnu mentioned like getting in that sleep schedule a week before. And I remember reading on Reddit, people are like, oh, a month before I, would get up at 5 a.m. or take melatonin or something. I don't know. But I think it is important to have your sleep schedule down like a week or 2 weeks before. I'm definitely a night owl, so and my test was the morning test. So had to get used to waking up early. And my test center was, I think it was like an hour away too, so had to drive a little bit. But I would say definitely, I think getting your sleep schedule down and consistent, can help a lot with, like getting enough sleep the night before and anxiousness. So would recommend, doing that as part of your test prep.
Yeah, I think earlier I mentioned a little bit about having like some test anxiety. I think that's why I did so many practice tests, because every single time I did it, I simulated test day. I literally wore the exact outfit I would wear to test day. Like I wore my sweats, I wore a long sleeve that didn't have a sweater or pockets. I wore like my socks, and I like had my phone away in like another room. I only took like 5 minutes for a time. I like roughly guesstimated like 5 minutes for bathroom breaks, just because I thought that if I were to simulate test day as much as possible, and then that would help me with test anxiety the day of. The only thing that was really different when I got there is, I'm at the testing center. I am more of an early morning person, so getting up early wasn't too difficult for me. But one thing I realized, and I hadn't known until day of, is that if you get to the testing center early, and I like to get to things early, and then it just leaves me with like a bunch of anxiety because I got there too early, and it feels a little bit too awkward to walk in. But I think I actually started my test at about 7:30 in the morning, because they just allowed me to like walk in and start to test when I got there, after they opened. And I think that actually helped a lot. And I would just write like words of affirmation for myself on my little whiteboard if I was just really not feeling it. I think accepting that you are not going to know every single thing that's going to come up on the MCAT, and being okay with being able to be like, okay, I'm just gonna, I don't know it, I'm just gonna move on and just focus on whatever is coming up. I think getting used to that feeling, or accepting it early on, and was very helpful to me as well. Because I think the more you dwell on stuff that you don't know, especially if you're like me and maybe physics and chem isn't your strongest subject, and that's literally like the first section on the MCAT, it's very easy to get bogged down and to have like your self-confidence feel like it's at an all-time low. So just finding ways to give yourself affirmations during the test, like you got here, you've studied, like you know what you are going to do fine. If it was hard for you, it was probably hard for a lot of other people too, right? It's not an easy test in general. So I think just kind of like psyching myself up throughout the test also was really helpful with the test anxiety piece. But I would really highly recommend like literally simulating everything you can about test day as much as possible. I think that's like the number one thing for me that helps with my test anxiety.
Thank you for sharing that. How did you approach the questions that you were unsure of? And you started talking about this, Joyce. How did you approach the questions that you were unsure of? Did you attempt to answer every question as it appeared, or did you skip questions and flag them and revisit them? And this is related to a question we got as well. How did you manage your time when tackling each section? So either one.
I guess since I started talking about it, sorry I'm talking so much. So as I was doing my test, or as I was doing practice tests, I realized that I had a tendency to second guess myself a lot during the test taking process. And most of the times when I changed my answers, I would change my answers from the right answer to the wrong answer. And that was something that I think that's an important I don't know, test taking strategy that you need to figure out about yourself. Occasionally, I would change answers from the wrong answer to the right answer, but it wasn't often enough, or it wasn't often enough where it justified for me to change my answers, if that makes sense. So if I when I approached this question I didn't know, if I wasn't able to almost immediately answer it, I would just flag it and move on to the next question so that I could at least get through every question on that section and at least see it once. It's probably not, I don't know if it's like the most effective strategy because I probably flagged like over half the questions on the test. But I think it's better to actually like at least see all the questions and see what you have left, as opposed to spending all your time on maybe one question and then panicking that you don't have enough time for the rest of the questions, and potentially those being questions that you could have gotten like the points for if you were to spend maybe like a little bit more time on it that you would have had if you didn't spend so much time the first time, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think that's primarily how I did it. And I don't know if it's because I really didn't have time to review, but I also did this in medical school. I don't review my answers because, again, I second guess myself a lot and it has never worked out for me. It's really hard to not change your answer, especially when you don't feel like, especially when you're not confident in your answer. But I would recommend, like, as you're doing your test review practice problems, see, like, is it because you didn't know the answer, or is it because you changed your answer? And if you're like me and you end up changing your answer really often, that might be a sign to start practicing not changing your answer. If that means like you don't review, then you have to, again, like you have to do what works for you. I don't think that's really super conventional advice, but it's something that has worked for me consistently, especially after I realized that that was something that I have a tendency to do.
Honestly, Joyce already said this, but I think I cannot stress this enough. I struggle with this to this day. Don't waste 5 minutes on a question, y'all. If you know, like, whatever amount of time you have for a passage, I forget, it's been forever, but you'll know how much time you have for each one, right? You'll know what passage you should be on at the moment. If, like, let's say, a minute or so goes on for a question and you don't get it, you will end up missing way more questions at the end by wasting that time, probably not even getting this one correct. If you just keep reading it, stressing yourself out, it's totally fine. This is this is exactly the reason why Joyce was saying it's so important to do those practice tests. You will write them. You will feel really bad about a lot of the questions. You will see by the end of your studying, right, that you still did well, and that will get you through it. Like the confidence of, you know what, this is how I normally feel. Like I've never felt good after any test I've ever written in my life. Every time I'm 100% sure I've failed. And a lot of them I haven't failed. I'm about to graduate medical school, okay? And this is how some of us just are gonna feel. But once you've done it, right, then you can look back and be like, this is just how I normally feel. Great. And then keep moving on and then get to the end. It's really important to just not get bogged down. And I feel like all of this also ties in with the whole anxiety aspect of it all. Just like be confident. It's all about mindset. Just 1,000 people done it before you, 1,000 people will do it after you. You'll be fine. Just breathe in, breathe out. I'll be okay. It's all about just like holding it in and just like focusing that, okay, I only have to do this for like 2 more hours and then I can go do insert fun thing. Okay, just get through it and you'll be fine.
That was great. Thank you so much. I think we've gotten through a ton of questions, like from our list and then also from the Q&A. Thank you all attendees so much for being so active in this discussion. It's always way more fun when we get live questions. And thanks for the panelists doing overtime and answering those questions on the chat too. I think unless like any of the attendees have any additional last minute questions they want to send in, I think we've mostly covered everything we needed to cover. Maybe in the meantime, if any other panelists have any like last minute advice or words of encouragement or tips, I think that would be a nice way to end the panel.
I would say use Reddit to a certain extent. I think there's a lot of good resources and like study schedules. And I think there was even like a spreadsheet for all the you wrote explanations that was very helpful. So a lot of great resources out there made by people, but also be mindful of like how it may be, or this may be more like student doctorate network, but like toxicity and stuff like comparisons. So just, you know, be mindful of that and use Reddit as a resource and not as I guess like I don't know what you would use it as, but just, you know, be mindful that it's a good resource to use, but don't put too much weight in it. And good luck.
I think I already gave you all my words of like encouragement, but the only other thing I would say is I did dedicated, like with my partner, we wrote it, you know, we did all of our studying together, wrote it at the same time, and that was super helpful to have somebody else to go through this wonderful time with. So if you have, you know, friends that you can write it with, partner, whatever that may be, I would absolutely recommend it. I did the same thing with Vishnu right here for step 1. I think you need a buddy to get you through this, or a loved one. So just, I would definitely say try to keep yourself sane by having people going through it nearby, and you'll be fine. Good luck. I'm sure you'll do great.
Yeah, totally echoing. It was really isolating because, you know, none of my friends were taking the MCAT at the same time as I was. But if you also have overbearing parents, which I do, it is okay to not tell your parents exactly what your scores are looking like or exactly what progress is looking like, because my parents would even like in my 30, like me being like 28 at the time, my parents would be like, oh, so how's MCAT studying going and all of that stuff. And that just for me was a lot of unnecessary pressure and made me wish that I hadn't been so open with everything that I had been doing. But again, that's only if you have like really overbearing parents. Otherwise, definitely echo, you know, find your support system. People who are not going to, you know, hound you after every single practice day that you've had, but just know that, you know, they can provide you support in the way that you need support. Otherwise, like you will get through it. I honestly think like studying for the MCAT was like the worst time in my whole pre-med experience. But you will get through it. everyone has gone through it here. You will.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
just echo I'm sorry, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in the day-to-day grind of studying for the MCAT, sometimes, it's helpful to remember your motivation for taking a test like this. And so, sometimes you go back to your roots and you ask yourself, why am I taking such a terrible test? But it's gonna be so that, you're gonna be a great doctor. And as cliche as it sounds, no matter what happens on the MCAT, the MCAT is just one step and it's not going to define how good you're going to be as a doctor, and how good you are as a physician. And also on days when you just don't feel like studying, be forgiving to yourself. I think it's sometimes really we're all type A personalities in medical school and in the medical, in the pre-med world, especially being pre-med at UCLA. It feels like everyone's doing more than you, everyone's, ahead of you, and everyone's doing the latest and greatest. But be forgiving to yourself. Even if you're like, oh, why can't I get through like 10 questions today? It's okay, So be forgiving to yourself. Remember what motivates you, and good luck. You'll do great.
I'd just like to echo what everyone has said. I think I can't stress enough the importance of having like buddies to go through like the experience with. I think when I was taking the MCAT, like I think most of my buddies who were taking it, taken it the year before when we were all still in undergrad. So I think it was a little bit isolating when studying for the MCAT, but I think just like what I've learned subsequently in terms of studying for board exams and afterwards, like Farnaz had said, like studying with a buddy, like that'll just like get you up in the morning, like go to like a designated place to study. We'll order the same thing for like lunch and dinner every day. So there's like a sense of routine that somebody can hold you accountable for. Like all of those things are just super important. I think just that community is just very important for physical and mental health. And yeah, I think you're all going to do amazing. And yeah, everyone's going to get through it and you're all going to do great.
All right, thank you guys so much. That was really great. I think we can go ahead and end the recording here.